Hello, today we're going to learn about the penetrating vessel and how it can help you be more at home in your body and with your place on earth. So the penetrating vessel, or the Chong Mai is its Chinese name, is one of the 8 extraordinary vessels of Chinese medicine. I was actually not taught them in my initial training, as many other shiatsu practitioners are not, and still aren't today. I trained 40 years ago, and nobody really talked about the extraordinary vessels, nor did acupuncturists. And so I want to share a little bit, how did I come to work with the penetrating vessel? It was really through my work with pregnant women, and I started feeling something that I didn't understand. Connections and feelings, emotional connections, physical awarenesses, and gradually I discovered that there was a vessel, which is essentially like a meridian. You're probably aware of some of the meridians of Chinese medicine, like the lung or the heart. Well, the extraordinary vessels are much more fundamental, and the penetrating vessel is known as the vessel of bonding, or the sea of blood. And this was what I was feeling when I was working with my pregnant clients, because the penetrating vessel, we're going to look at the pathway in this presentation, and we're also going to look at how it develops in our body. But what I was feeling was really a fullness in the breast, and of course a fullness in the abdomen, some connections into the legs, and it was linking up lots of the other meridians of Chinese medicine. And so that was what led me to study more, and in the text of Chinese medicine I realised that there were these other vessels. And I want to start with what I've developed as affirmations for these vessels, because that kind of really ties in with what I was feeling when I was working with pregnant women. Initially, when I started working with pregnant women, they were mostly healthy, well pregnant women. As the years went by, I got more complex cases. So with healthy pregnancy, and really the essential expression of pregnancy is an energy of, well, it's mothering in its most tangible form, where during pregnancy we are nurturing and supporting another being to grow, and we're not just nurturing them with our physical body, essentially we are nurturing them with our blood. We're nurturing them with our emotions and our whole being. We are our baby's first home. And so the quality of our baby's first home is going to have a real big impact on the rest of their life. And the penetrating vessel energy is particularly strong in women because it's very linked to blood, and blood, the actual physical blood volume of a woman increases in pregnancy by about 30 to 40% by the end of pregnancy. So it's not surprising that I was feeling this strong connection with blood when I was working. But blood in Chinese medicine is more than just the physical blood that's circulating through our blood vessels, obviously being pumped through our heart. The Chinese would talk about how the heart pumped the blood, how the spleen and the liver and the kidneys are very important organs for producing the blood and filtering the blood, and all the things that we know about with Western medicine. But with Chinese medicine, it's also a quality of nourishing with our emotions. And so the affirmations that I have developed for the penetrating vessel are: I feel at home in my body and at home in my place on earth. I create nourishing relationships with myself, from which I can create nourishing relationships with others. So, penetrating vessel, its essence is a mother holding her baby. We can see that. But as I already said, it's the mother looking and supporting the baby, looking after the baby in her womb, growing the baby in her womb. And it's really, as I expressed in the affirmations, how we make our connection to a place. Our mother is our first home, and so this influences how we make connection to home the rest of our life, and how much we can feel safe in our home, and how we are able to receive nourishment from another. And so I want to actually look at, before I start studying the pathway and showing you how the pathway is in the body, and about some of the patterns of the penetrating vessel, what it regulates apart from pregnancy, I want to talk about how it actually develops in the body. So this is some of the work that I've done in trying to understand the penetrating vessel. Because I was working with pregnancy, I also wanted to understand not only the changes in the mother's body, but also what was going on for the baby. And of course the ancient Chinese didn't know anything much in detail about embryology in the way that we do now, but I think it's really fascinating that a lot of what they talk about when they talk about how the penetrating vessel develops and the qualities of the penetrating vessel, we can really see clearly when we understand what happens to the baby. So in some of my previous videos on the menstrual cycle, I've talked about the egg, and we all know that, or hopefully we know that the fertilized egg, once it's fertilized, it travels down the fallopian tube for about a week to 10 days. So in the first week or 10 days of our life, we actually don't need nourishment from anywhere else outside. We're independent, we're self-sufficient. And that is a quality of the penetrating vessel as well. So regardless of the nature of our first relationship with our mother, even before that, we have a quality of independence. So if our relationship was difficult, challenging, unsafe, my relationship with my mother was all of those things, we have a capacity that's beyond that. We have some greater energy or potential that we can connect with, a kind of autonomy. But after a week or 10 days, the egg in order to grow, it needs to have nourishment from outside. And the first nourishment the baby has is through the blood cells of the mother's womb. And what happens, the baby, or the egg, the fertilized egg, implants on the lining, in the lining of the uterus, and actually becomes immersed within the lining of the womb, surrounded by blood cells of the mother. So blood is coming into the baby from all around. And the Chinese didn't talk about this in the way that I'm now talking about, but for me this very much is the essence of the penetrating vessel. They did call it the sea of blood, and it's about how we settle. We find a place in the womb, in the lining of the womb, and we stop moving, and we start to put down roots. We see when we look at pictures of embryology that the blood cells start connecting the cells of our outer body, which will become eventually the placenta, but the placenta hasn't yet been developed. This is a more mature placenta, and of course this is a more mature baby. The placenta doesn't really fully take over its functions of supporting the baby through the umbilical cord until more like the end of the first trimester of pregnancy, which for the baby is about 9 weeks after conception. So firstly, we're putting down these roots and receiving blood. And I see that very much as a quality of the penetrating vessel. We need to have some nourishment from outside, and that nourishment is through our blood. And we'll see when we look at the pathway that there's a branch of the penetrating vessel in the legs. And the legs are how, as adults, we move from place to place, and we can put down roots energetically, we can stop moving and settle. So that's a first phase, implantation, very important. And it's also a phase at which there is a high level of miscarriage, because there's a physical connection I described, but there's also more of an emotional, an energetic, even a spiritual connection of the baby feeling ready to connect. It's our first connection, our first relationship, where we need somebody else in order to grow. We need to come into relationship. And maybe the baby feels, it's not the right time, it's not the right place. And maybe the mother also isn't ready. I mean, of course, this is hard to prove, but there have been books written about this, past life experiences or experiences that people have talked about. When they've experienced this, they've gone back into their time in the womb. Sorry, not past life experiences, their time in the womb, regression experiences when they had this feeling. But it was maybe related to past life because they decide, wasn't ready. And then they might come back again into the same body or a different body. All this is to just show that there is a relationship being made, and the mother also, in her level, has to say yes and accept that she's going to give her body over for 9 months and longer in order to nourish the baby. It takes a lot of her energy. But once the baby's implanted, or the egg's implanted, it's the pre-embryology. We're just bunches of cells, clusters of cells. But there's rapid growth, because the egg until that point hasn't actually changed in size since fertilization. It's just developed lots of cells inside, a differentiation. But at implantation it grows very rapidly. And first, our bodies, our inner body is 2 cell layers, and the inner cell mass at 2 weeks, it's easy to remember, a front and a back, a top and a bottom. And when I talk about, and you may have heard about the conception and the governing vessel, which are the midline of the body, conception vessel from the perineum to the mouth, governing vessel all the way through the spine, really the midline of the body. All the functions that the Chinese talk about related to conception and governing vessel, the yin and the yang, the front and the back, the top and the bottom, digestion, inner yin is conception vessel, the front, yang, governing vessel, the back, inner, outer. They relate to this bilaminar disc. There's this bilaminar disc in the 3rd week, so bilaminar, 2 layers of cells, has a 3rd cell layer which emerges from between the front and the back. And we now this is at 3 weeks, 3 cell layers during the 3rd week. And these 3 cell layers are known as the endoderm, the ectoderm. I talked about that with governing and conception, the most inner, the most outer. And the mesoderm is in between the 2. And when we look at the diagram of the penetrating vessel, you'll see that the penetrating vessel is actually in between the governing and the conception vessel. And its cell layer, the mesoderm, very much corresponds to the functions that the Chinese attributed to what it was regulating. So I think that's really fascinating, because they didn't know about the endoderm, the ectoderm, the mesoderm, but those are very much the qualities of governing conception and penetrating, which sometimes people say are 3 branches of one energy. And once this 3rd cell layer, the mesoderm, is very much related, so now I'm talking in embryological terms and developmental terms, to all the tissues that are related to blood and the heart. Blood vessels, connective tissues, bones, you have blood in the bones, the skeletal system, muscles, the lymphatic system, the spleen, the kidneys, the reproductive organs. And this is what the Chinese say the penetrating vessel regulates. So I think it's pretty amazing. And also, from some of my other videos, you may have realised I talk about the inner organs, or the core 4 organs of the extraordinary vessels, and the heart is one of them. And the heart, once the penetrating vessel, or the mesoderm, has formed physically, so I see the mesoderm as the first physical expression of the penetrating vessel. And once that's formed, then the heart can start to develop. I mean, the cells of the heart have already been there, but the heart undergoes its next stage of development, and sometime during the 4th week, it used to be thought as early as 21 days, so really the beginning of the 4th week, but now it's thought that it's more like the end of the 4th week. Anyway, sometime in the 4th week after conception, so that's 6 weeks for the mother, the heart starts to beat. But it's a very primitive heart, it's just one tube, and it's very simple, but you've got a simple pump. And I think it's really fascinating that the heart, which is such a fundamental organ for the penetrating vessel, and indeed all the extraordinary vessels, is the first organ that forms in our body, and it's considered one of the most important organs for the ancient Chinese. And then during the next few weeks, our placenta is, well, since implantation, where we implanted, this is where our placenta is going to develop. And our placenta actually is made up of cells from the fertilized egg, not our mother's cells. It's attached to our mother's womb, where we attach to implantation, but the cells come from us. So the placenta is actually part of us, and in some cultures people talk about the placenta as being our twin. And from about 6 weeks we have the first stages of our umbilical cord, which attaches us to the placenta. And then, as I said, from about 9 weeks after conception, the placenta is fully functioning. So it's a gradual transition that we're getting blood from around us to blood from the placenta, and that the blood from the placenta comes in through our navel. And our navel is a really important place in Chinese medicine. It's on the conception vessel, but it's included as part of the pathway of the penetrating vessel, because of course that's where we're receiving our nourishment. Conception vessel is very much about digestion and nourishment as well, and there are many close links between the conception and the penetrating vessel. But if you have the memory of how we're receiving from about 6 weeks, so 8 weeks towards the end of the first trimester, and all the way through the rest of our time in the womb, we're receiving our nourishment through our navel. We're organising around our navel. This is a very important area in our body, and a very important area for the penetrating vessel. And so I won't say any more about the baby in the womb being nourished by the mother. I'm going to do another video on the penetrating vessels and cycles of blood, looking at the penetrating vessel more from the mother's point of view. But for now, let's stay with the baby. So really the baby is, as I already said, being nourished by the blood, which is a whole nurturing quality, emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually, everything. The baby is completely dependent on the mother. And then after birth, the baby is separated from the placenta. So actually how we separate, how we let go of this connection has quite an important impact also on how we make transitions in our lives. But then the baby feeds. If the baby is being breastfed, then the baby is feeding from the mother's breasts, and breast milk in Chinese medicine, and indeed in modern medicine, is a transformation of blood. And for the Chinese, blood energy, it's a continuation of giving our baby our blood through breast milk through breastfeeding, we are connecting and we're still nourishing our baby. So it's a continuation, but this time the nourishment is coming from the mouth. So we'll see on the penetrating vessel pathway lots of connections around our mouth, but also the whole front of our body. So even if we don't breastfeed our baby, hopefully we're holding our baby and we're stimulating our baby through the whole of the front of their body, but also hopefully we hold them a little bit at their back, supporting their kidneys, which is also an important pathway. So again, how we were fed our first nourishment after birth, if we weren't breastfed, maybe that created more things to digest for us. But if we were breastfed, this is why I brought the baby in, because this is really what the penetrating vessel is all about. And then, of course, as the baby grows and develops, then they start separating and need to learn to nourish themselves eventually. So all this to say that why I also call the penetrating vessel the vessel of bonding, and it's about how we make relationships with, how we make all relationships. It's the basis of all the future relationships. So hopefully now I've described that, when you look at the picture of the pathway of the penetrating vessel, it all makes sense. You may or may not know the points, but it actually is said to start in the centre of the body. And this is the pathway, starting in the centre of the body. And there's a branch that goes down in the legs. And it's quite broad, as you can see from the picture. And it starts going down into the legs from stomach, a point called stomach 30, which is, stomach is about nourishment and taking in food, and it's related to the earth. And then we come down in a broad line and we have some stomach points by the knees. And then we come down and we have some spleen points in the feet, in the lower leg. Spleen 6, which is actually called the meeting of the 3 yin, and it's a very much a point that relates to blood and anchoring and earthing, and a point that a lot of people know, kidney 1, just below the ball of the foot. That's also the most yin point, and it's kidneys, which are related to blood, but anchoring to the earth. And then we've got a couple of other points. Liver is also an important energy for blood and nourishment and anchoring. And the regulating point, spleen 4, earth. Earth. Our first earth is our mother, and then how do we connect with other people and with the earth? That's all expressed in the leg branch. Very important, because conception and governing vessel, and indeed girdle, which are the first family of vessels to emerge, don't have pathways in the legs. The penetrating vessel is the only one, and it goes down the legs. And as you can see in the picture, you have arrows connecting you down to earth. It's about how we root into the earth, how we make our home. And then when you look into the upper part of the body, it's actually following the kidney meridian in the chest. Kidney meridian, kidneys are very important for blood, and also the ancestral link. Kidneys in Chinese medicine store our essence, which is very much related to our energetic DNA and our connection with our ancestors. And it's each side of conception vessel. So it's very close. You can see it sort of emerges from the conception vessel. And then in many texts, they have these lines as sort of arrows, but there are pathways across the breasts. And so it's not surprising that the breasts are an important part of the penetrating vessel, because our breasts as women only fully mature when we feed a baby. That's the final stage of maturation of the breasts. And it explains the close links with the breasts. And I've added in a point, heart 1, which is in the centre of the armpit. That isn't in the text, but for me it makes sense to really connect the breast with the first point on the heart, and the breast tissue goes out all across the breasts. And then it carries on up through the throat. Well, that's how we take in our nourishment, but also how we connect with our words, with our spirit, with our heart, with other people. And then it goes around the mouth. Our most intimate connections with other people are through kissing, through the mouth, emotionally sharing, exchange. And then there's a connection up through the eyes, the stomach. So actually on a baby, this part of the pathway is very important. Babies that have difficulty feeding in their early days, we want to work this part of the penetrating vessel. It's also important not to forget the pathway that's in the back, because I told you it's got a connection with the governing vessel. It's got a pathway, it connects with the perineum, that's an important part of the penetrating vessel, and it goes up to an important point called Ming Men, between the second and the third lumbar vertebrae. It's a point that's shared with the governing vessel and the girdle vessel. And the main patterns of imbalance are, in fact, if somebody doesn't have a very strong connection to the earth, so the pathway in the legs, how we connect with the earth, how we connect, putting down our roots, or a weakness in our kidneys, which is a weakness in our connection with our past, perhaps through trauma, perhaps through our own trauma or challenges in life, or perhaps through ancestral trauma. And so the main pattern of imbalance, and you might already start thinking about this in terms of women's cycles of blood, is the penetrating vessel isn't anchored either through the legs or in the lower back, and it goes up. So then there's a lot of heat rising, a lot of anxiety, sickness, hot flushes, all these kind of things. That shows a disharmony in the penetrating vessel. And so anytime there's this too much energy rising up, then we need to support the kidneys and the legs. So I want to say a little bit about the name, the Chinese name Chong Mai, which is the ideogram, which you can see here. And there are two parts to it. You can see there's two characters on the outside and a character on the inside. And the characters on the outside, it's open to interpretation, but it's generally accepted that it's feet walking, and it's about how we kind of step and move in the world, and how we connect to the earth, and also how we circulate energy within our body and the blood, so especially blood. And the inner part is a person trying to raise a heavy weight up from the earth. And this is showing like two things. One is how we are earthbound creatures, and so we change and grow through our relationship with the outer world. This is an important part of the Chong. But also it can be interpreted as how we nourish a field. If you break it down more, the inside bit, how you have a barren earth at the bottom, and then how you have it's nourished at the top. So it can be seen as how we nourish the earth. And then the whole thing together is said to be like a crossroads where people meet and they can exchange, and then they carry on walking. So that we are enriched through our relationship with others. And this shows the transformational nature of the Chong. So I've created a mudra for each of the vessels, and I can explain that briefly in relation to the pathway that we've looked at. You put your thumbs together. Now the thumb links is the hand branch connecting with the spleen meridian. So spleen is quite important energy. Spleen is an important organ in Chinese medicine, connecting us to the earth. And then the middle finger is the heart protector meridian, connecting to the heart and the breasts, And heart protector, if you look on the diagram, it's associated or coupled or paired point. So it's connecting the earth with the heart and heaven above and below. So that's heart protector. And then the fourth, the ring finger, is triple heater, which is also very connected with heart protector and circulation and movement of energy, and represents a bit the yang quality. And then there's space. So we get the figure of 8, the infinity, the connections with the extraordinary vessels and that centering, and then a connection outwards with the stomach meridian, which connects to the large intestine in the index fingers, and then the little finger relates to kidney and bladder. And you can either have them facing out or, into space if you want to connect more with the spacious qualities, or connecting in. And maybe today we'll place that over the heart, because that's an important aspect of the penetrating vessels, our connection with our heart. And so as you might want to just let all of this settle, just having this mudra placed over your heart, and close your eyes. And let everything that I've talked about settle in your body. As I've talked about your time in the womb, your relationship with your mother, your connection through your placenta and umbilical cord, you may find, and also breastfeeding, were you breastfed or not, what was your first food, how did your mother hold you when you were born? Just let this all be present in your body, being aware of any feelings or emotions that have been stirred up. Let yourself receive the support of the earth through your legs and your feet. Also through your perineum if you're sitting down. Just let yourself receive from the earth on which you're sitting or resting now. And remember that you have the capacity to nourish yourself in the way that you need. Regardless of your connection with your mother. And so you might want to sit as long as you need, so that you can feel at home in your body. So if you want to press pause on the video, just take time to sit. And I will say goodbye. And thank you for sharing the power of the penetrating vessel, or the Chong Mai, with me today.